What hath Vienna do with Jerusalem? Now, that's a phrase I just made up to explain this conflict sometimes that we have perceived between faith and psychology. Vienna being, the place where Freud hung out. And on today's episode, we are going to deal with some of those elements of how faith and psychology can work together, informing each other, indeed. And specifically, we're diving into why we know it's hard to love our neighbor. What are the biases and the circumstances that get in the way of doing this thing we know Jesus is a big fan of us doing? So on today's episode, I'm pleased to have amazing guests. We have two today. We have Dr. Brittany M. Tausen, an assistant professor of social psychology at Baylor University. She's published widely in psychology and interdisciplinary journals and directs the Classrooms That Cultivate Character initiative. And our second guest is Dr. Catherine M. Douglas, an associate professor of educational ministry and practical theology at Seattle Pacific University. She is also an ordained minister in the Presbyterian Church, USA. Both of them co-authored Love Your Neighbor, How Psychology Can Enliven Faith and Transform Community, the subject of our discussion today. I'm Jake Doberenz, and this is Christianity Without Compromise, a podcast for Christians who love Jesus but are tired of culture war faith. Now, let's get to rebuilding a faith that actually looks like Jesus. Brittany Tausen and Katie Douglas, I am really excited that you guys are here. I love when we have more than one human on the show. Adds some more liveliness, I suppose. Maybe a little chaos, but hey, chaos is not a bad thing necessarily. So I'm really excited to dive in. And I read a lot of books for this show. I do read a lot of books. I am privileged to get a lot of books because all the publishers send me them. But yours is might be one of my favorites in 2026. We're not over yet, so I don't want to make any crazy promises. We'll see, but I enjoy exactly the kind of subject that you guys are tackling. So, there's my amazing preamble that will have everybody really excited to hear what we have to say. So, yeah.
Thanks for saying that. That means a lot.
Yeah, sure, of course. I love to start with stories. And so I'm hoping you guys could take us back to Seattle Pacific University. And you had this experience with a tent city. And I know you guys had some early conversations with the book at this time, somewhere around that time in the world. So can you just give us the origin story of the book and take us back to what was going on with this work with unhoused people and all of that? Either one of you tell us the story, or you guys could do it together, of course.
Brittany, go ahead.
Sure. So the very first year that I was in Seattle was 2016, and it was Katie and I's first year on faculty there. And Seattle Pacific University was for the second time hosting a government-sanctioned homeless encampment called Tent City 3. And so this was inspired by a mission to love our unhoused neighbors, to care for the poor, and in Seattle, because of the homelessness crisis, there are a lot of unhoused individuals. This particular homeless encampment is government sanctioned, which means it's legal, but it has a whole bunch of really strict rules and requirements. And it also, one of those is that it has to rotate every 3 months. And so in order for Tent City 3 to operate, churches, universities, other nonprofit organizations have to be willing to offer themselves up as hosting sites. And so as a social psychologist who studied dehumanization, I thought this was a really incredible opportunity for what we refer to as intergroup contact, for groups of people like students to come into close proximity with individuals experiencing homelessness who they might not otherwise encounter and have meaningful interactions with. But I was also curious to see how that intergroup contact actually impacted our students' perceptions of individuals experiencing homelessness. You might imagine that this intergroup contact could lead to much more loving perceptions, but you might also imagine that it could have some maybe unintended negative impacts. And so I wanted to be thinking really carefully about how we can be faithful to live into our mission, but also ensure that the impact that we're having on our students' perceptions of individuals experiencing homelessness was in line with our intentions. And so I ran a study looking at how students' perceptions at the university level change from before to after we hosted Tent City 3 on campus. And meanwhile, Katie, who was also really interested in this opportunity to help our students love our unhoused neighbors, was doing something a little bit different in her classroom. So she can tell you about that.
Yeah, so I teach a required course for all freshmen called Christian Faith. And one of my deep convictions is that we meet Christ among those who are suffering, as Jesus taught us. So I thought this would be a really great opportunity for my students to learn from people, to get to know some of their neighbors who we were hosting. And so I stopped by and talked to their democratically elected mayor of Tent City. They have a new mayor. I think every month they vote on them. And I just said, hey, I'd like to bring a group of about, 30 to 40 students by. Would that be okay? Would you give us a tour? And he was so excited. So I brought my students, and they had this really profound kind of experience. So they got to go on a tour where they saw how they're within this, it's like a chain link fence with blue tarp around it, but they have an area where each person has their own individual tent, which they decorate, and they have dogs, which my students love. They have a kitchen area where people cook, but also those who donate food, where the food ends up and anyone can eat it. And then they also got to hear how Tent City 3 actually sees itself as providing a ministry within the city of Seattle for those who are suddenly finding themselves without a home for the night. And so they actually have a big open tent that's empty, and it's for anyone to come in, stay. And then they have somebody at the front desk, and you have to actually check in and out. And if you come there and you're running away from someone, you can give the name of people who are not to be let into the community for that evening. So my students were really inspired by this. They also saw really sad, hard things to see, like children living in tents and people who were getting ready for work, going off to work, knowing that they would be coming home from school or work back to this tent. So my students had this really profound experience, and it was great and wonderful. And I said, how can we replicate this or do it again? And I was telling Brittany about it, and she said, interestingly enough, my study shows that just sort of general student experience was very different.
Yeah. So if you want me to get into it, like the results were just pretty complicated. Some of our students really improved in their perceptions of individuals experiencing homelessness during the time that Tent City was on our campus. But other students, and ironically, like the students who actually had the best perceptions of individuals experiencing homelessness coming into that time, left with worse impressions of individuals experiencing homelessness. And so there was just this nuance to it that helped me to understand that if we wanted to be faithful as a university, we needed to be really intentional about how we were scaffolding this experience for students and actually kind of meeting students where they were at based on how much exposure they had had to homelessness before, and maybe their perceptions of individuals experiencing homelessness going into it. And so this just created a really rich opportunity for Katie and I to say, how do we do that more faithfully? How do we scaffold this really well? And we both have this heart that these types of intergroup interactions are absolutely necessary, like critical for loving our neighbors well, for changing perceptions positively, but also this kind of added layer of if we do them well, if we're faithful to how we scaffold them. And so that started a collaborative project between Katie and I, where we were starting to help her students navigate conversations with individuals experiencing homelessness over a shared dinner or a shared meal. And one thing that was really important to us about this particular experience was it eliminated the power dynamics that were still maintained when our students as a general population kind of passed by Tent City 3 or maybe did or did not have direct interactions with them. And so we said, how can we cultivate a more deeply meaningful interaction where somebody actually has a chance to sit down and one-on-one really get to know someone and to be known in return, to share some of their own story too, so that they don't just have these kind of unilateral I'm here to help or I'm here to serve, but I maintain kind of a separate distance and a power dynamic in this relationship. And so that's kind of where our next research study led us.
Well, thanks for a great kind of intro to all of that. And we're already teasing some ideas that we'll explore kind of throughout this episode. One of my frustrations of this interview is that we can't cover everything that I want to cover, but that's why you buy the book. So what do you know?
Yeah.
There's a lot more good stuff in there, and in your guys' own research and everything that we can't cover. But appreciate that introduction to kind of some of the beginnings of these conversations, nuancing some of that. A model like Tent City 3 is also very new to me. I'm no stranger to Tent City. I grew up outside of Portland, Oregon, Pacific Northwest guy, quite familiar with that kind of thing. Was very different, and so fascinating to hear about. So, like I said, there are a lot of things to cover, a lot of directions to go, but I'm super curious to just for you two to talk about this dialogue between psychology and theology matters. What does psychology offer the church when it comes to living out Jesus' command to love your neighbor? Why do you want to put these guys in conversation? Theology and psychology. Why do you want to put them in conversation? I guess just defend, all your life's work or something, if you don't mind.
Oh, sure. I guess I will start by saying I think one thing that psychology and really just like research in general allows us to do is to assess the impact of Christian practices. And so there are oftentimes very well-meaning Christian practices that get lived out in lots of different ways. And some of those ways might be more beneficial and more loving, or received as more loving, and others of those might be less beneficial or received as less loving. And so psychology and psychological research in general allows us to really evaluate the impact of some of these Christian practices and to determine if that impact is aligned with the intention of the practice, the heart behind the practice. And so I think that's one really useful way that we can think about the value of psychology and theology together. Another thing I would say is just that the research kind of gives us a model for how to do what Scripture is calling us to do. And so I love that psychology illuminates a lot of different practices that we can implement to have the kind of outcome or intended like action that we're trying to achieve. And so those are the ways that I think about psychology working well with theology.
Yeah, my area is actually practical theology, which is an interdisciplinary field. And so we believe like scripture is normative. We have conversations about kind of guiding principles or, what does orthopraxy look like, aligning your life well with God. And so like Brittany said, I think sometimes we have a lot of really good intentions and we have an assumption about what we think is the best way to do whatever it is that we want to be doing. But science has a lot to offer us. And I think at different points in time, theologians have trusted or mistrusted the sciences. So I'm somebody who grew up with no tension between science and faith. To me, I'm like, God's truth is on all places. Like when there's a new medication that helps people with depression, we should use that. If there are new advances in understanding how pollution can be decreased to help the overall health of people, we should use that. That's to glorify God through creation and science. And so it's been interesting as we've been on different podcasts, but also we taught a class together called Neighbor Love to think about how for some people that's a really big and deep tension, that they believe there are passages in the Bible that don't align with what science is teaching us. And then you have to check your brain at the door when you go into church, or, you just kind of like let your faith disintegrate and just say, well, I believe science, which I think is kind of a false choice that you're not really being asked. I don't think we're being asked to make that choice. And I do think psychology actually has a lot to offer. And what we found, we actually worked together as fellows through St. Andrews University through this project. And their goal was actually to bring scientists and theologians together to think about really challenging problems that our society faces. And I actually think when we work collaboratively, we can come up with better strategies or solutions, or better align our faith with what we're called to do through Scripture. So I think we should use every resource available to us to try to understand humanity and also God's creation better. Science is one of those tools.
Love it. I love it. I'm on board with that too. I didn't grow up in the complete harmony, unity camp between science and Scripture and all that fun stuff, but it's a fun place to be now. I landed in the biblical studies theology side of things myself. For a hot minute, I was thinking about psychology, but I'll leave that to people who can do that stuff better than me. That's okay. So love it. Well, there's a lot in the book. I've already said that. I've already alluded to that. Legally, as a host, I can kind of do whatever I want and kind of pick what parts I like and want to explore. But you guys have already organized the book into kind of these 3 parts. And so what I have done now is kind of chosen sort of a representative section or study from each of the 3 parts. And we can talk about the study and other studies and whatever details you want to add, and then kind of talk about what does this mean practically. I think it'll be fun. Again, everybody's gonna have to read the book. It's really cool stuff. I'm gonna be preaching with stuff inspired by it. I'm gonna be writing my Substack articles inspired. There's a lot of content, a lot of stuff that people will see out in the world. And for this first one, this is one that before reading the book, I've already preached on and written on, and that's this Good Samaritan study that I was done at Princeton. So can you guys give us a rundown on what was the experiment like, and then ultimately what did that reveal about a potential barrier to loving our neighbors?
Katie, do you want to take this one?
Oh, I went to Princeton Seminary, and it cuts to the core. I think about
that's right.
Was it during my era there? It thankfully was before me. After that, we figured it out. Amen. So this study, right. Brittany, correct me if I'm wrong. The study took students and put them in 2 groups. They told them you're going to either preach, you're preparing for a job interview was one group, and the other one was preaching a sermon on the Good Samaritan parable. Is that right? And then they then divided those into 3 groups. So some people, it was like, you got plenty of time. And another group is like, ooh, starts in 5 minutes. And the other one was like, oh no, you're late. So what the big significant finding was, it doesn't matter what people are thinking about ahead of time. It was how much of a hurry they were in when they were on their way to get there. To me, this is one that I find so convicting. So the finding is that if you're in a hurry, you're not going to help. It's very unlikely.
Yeah.
And if you're a little bit in a hurry, maybe you'll help. But if you actually have a lot of time, you're the most likely to help. And since we've put the book out in the world, my own hypocrisy is just in the spotlight. So the other day, I live near the Aurora corridor in Seattle, and I was pulling out to go to work, and I'm in a hurry because I have to teach a class. And there's a woman laying wrapped in a blanket in my alley. And she's right behind my neighbor's driveway, which is right next to mine. And I get out and I say, hi, are you okay? And I'm trying to wake her up, but not touch her, because I think that would be kind of scary if someone touched you and you were asleep. So I'm like, hey, are you okay? And she's not responding. But she's right where every car in the alley has to drive through. And so I'm like, I got to get to work. So I throw it into reverse, call the non-emergency number in Seattle. And I just say, hi, there's a woman who's laying in the middle of our alley, and I'm worried about her. Would you send somebody else, not me, to help? And so then they're like, yes, we can. So then I text my neighbor who lives right there. And I said, hey, there's a woman in the alley, and I just want you to know, don't back your car up. So what does she do? She's not in a hurry. She works from home. She goes out, talks to this woman. She goes inside and gets her a cup of coffee. She comes back out, sits with her, and waits until the medical support people come out. And this woman had been sexually harassed the night before and was, scared and tired and cold. And she wasn't in a hurry, and she helped. I just think this finding, it's like, if you actually think about your day, it really is convicting. But then, Brittany, how should this shape, Brittany has a good example of how she shapes her time differently because of this, our awareness of the study.
Yeah, I think this study is really convicting, just like Katie is saying, because you can make something top of mind. Like these seminary students were getting ready to go preach on the Good Samaritan parable. It couldn't be more painfully obvious what you should be doing in this moment, like stopping to help the person that's like staged in their path that needs help, right? And it wasn't enough. It seems like it's really easy to justify and write off, like, I just can't because I don't have the time. And so many of us schedule our lives just back to back to back to back to back. And like, I'm notoriously bad at this. And used to actually schedule all my student meetings, even like 20-minute slots, like back to back to back to back to back. And so there's been two things in my life that I've tried to do differently now. And one of them is to put 10-minute buffers in between all of these meetings. And so it's like, it's not a ton of time, but it's just a little bit. And it's amazing to me how much it opens up in terms of, I'm not checking my watch constantly, trying to rush one student out the door for the next one to come in. And it opens up opportunities to pray with my students or to hear a little bit more about how they're doing in their days and just stories that wouldn't have come out otherwise. And the other thing I'm doing is trying to show up early, which is not my MO. Like, I am not like a 15 minutes early kind of person. But even recently, I've been practicing this a lot at work, and I'll come and sit in my classroom 15 minutes early, which as an introvert is also not my MO. Like, I might like to be late for many reasons. One, because I have a hard time switching tasks, but two, because I'm just like a little anxious, to be honest, about like what conversation is going to be happening in that space. And I go and I sit, and I've been talking to like the few students that are there early every morning for about 15 minutes before class. And you get to hear a lot and you get to know people. And I think they feel really seen and really loved. And it just takes 15 extra minutes. And so I think it creates space for us to be present to respond to the opportunities God puts in our lives, to see and to love the people in front of us. And it makes me so sad to think like there's those people every day that we're just running past, and that's an opportunity to help. And we're not even paying attention to it.
Oh, yeah. Like I said, it's been a study that's been on my radar. I don't know where that came across my radar initially. But what a powerful truth there. And love your guys' raw examples and practical ways to overcome this hurry that we are obsessed with in the world. I do a lot of work in my own studies and research about how people are just so zoned into results and things. And I talk about how sometimes efficiency is not always great because we miss the things happening in our world around
That's
us
right.
when it's all about got to get to the next thing. So
Yeah.
very
Yeah,
powerful,
absolutely.
very good. And that was one of many examples of the different kind of circumstantial reasons that it can be hard to love our neighbor. And then you turn to that second part I mentioned is still about why it's hard to love our neighbor. We look a little bit more internally, look at some other things. Again, a lot I could have kind of drawn out of there, but one that stuck out to me was an interesting experiment where participants were told to rate a woman's behavior in a conversation between a man and a woman. Um, and then in one version of the study, they were told that the man had sexually assaulted her after that. And they rated her as like more flirtatious and quote unquote asking for it and things after that. I mean, it was surprising, but also like not surprising maybe. But it was a shocker that particular study. So talking about that and just talking about in general, what do things like this reveal about some of our cognitive tendencies? And talk to us about this victim blaming thing that happens in our world.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you said it really nicely because it's like it's shocking and it's not, because we see victim blaming happening all the time, right? Like we are in the middle of watching this unfold on a global scale right now, and we're watching the way that victims are being blamed for sexual assault. And so I think like we can't overstate how important this is. But I think what's sobering about this study is that you see how quickly that victim blame can happen and how it can happen on this very non-conscious level, even for people who aren't physically involved in the dynamic at all, right? And so what's happening is people see this outcome that is just horrific and very hard to sit with and understand, right? And that actually makes people feel exposed and vulnerable themselves. They're like, if that could just happen to anybody, that could happen to me. And that feels terrifying because we don't then feel like we have any control over our own fates in the world. And psychologically, this is very unsettling for people. And so what happens is our brain starts to weave this narrative to say like, oh no, actually, didn't you pay attention to this little thing and that flirtatious move and that way that person was dressed and all of these little things that you could do that differently. You could control that. You could not say the flirtatious thing. You could not dress in that particular type of way. And then that is this lie that we're telling ourselves, right? Because that actually had nothing to do with why this person got assaulted. I mean, in the study, it's all made up, right? It's all like a pretend scenario. But those lies that our brain is telling us help us to feel like we have some control or like we have some power over our own fates and outcomes, that the same fate won't befall us if we just like do the quote unquote right things, right? And so it's really this psychological mechanism that's self-serving to protect our own sense of safety and ego, but it has all of these incredibly poignant downstream impacts for the way that we treat people who have survived sexual assault, right? And so I think that this is one of, I use the like language insidious in the book a lot when I'm talking about this, but it's one of the psychological studies and just bodies of research more generally that's the most unsettling to me, because people are so unconsciously or non-consciously aware of it. Like they just have no idea this is happening. If you ask them after the fact, they won't think that it made any difference that they heard then that person was sexually assaulted. They wouldn't guess the outcome of that study. But it's something to be mindful of, and that we have to be really conscious to intentionally catch and correct in ourselves when our brains go to that place of starting to like point fingers at victims or like survivors of sexual assault and say, what is my brain doing to make me feel more safe in this? And how can we place blame where blame is due, which is on the perpetrators of the sexual assault.
Yeah, hard stuff in the book in terms of encountering our own biases and our own things, right?
Yeah.
One of the things you guys do in the third part now is start to give us some strategies to get out of some of this stuff, these circumstantial, these internal things that are roadblocks, and you list several in there with lots of fun studies and research and real life stories and things. And I suppose because it was the chapter, I think it was the chapter something called like Talking Less or something. I took that personally. In part 3, you reference Juliana Schroeder and Nicholas Epley, their study of Chicago commuters, where they had people talk to strangers, and these strangers reported these positive experiences more than the people that did the normal thing. So using that as kind of that jumping off point, what are some of the benefits of, get this, Jesus was right, loving your neighbor?
Well, it's funny that study, like literally the other day I was thinking about it because I was on the light rail here in Seattle, the transit, coming from the airport back to my house, and my son was carrying his violin with him, and somebody started talking to us, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is like the study. That person is choosing to talk to us. And I was so ready to just like read my book and check out, right? And she's like, do you play violin? What do you play? This older woman. And my son's like looking at me like, why are they talking to us? Because it's the Seattle freeze, right? Like nobody does this. This is so strange.
Yeah, I know. Pacific
And so he
Northwest. Yep. Mm-hmm.
starts talking about Suzuki and playing Suzuki piano, or not piano, but violin. And then the woman's like, oh, what book are you in? And he's in book 2. And so she starts singing the tunes. And she said, I took Suzuki lessons and I love playing violin. I wish I had done it before. And then this other woman who's sitting near us is like, I teach music. And we're like, what? We have so much in common. And then this other couple is just listening in, and like they're getting involved with even though they're not musicians, but they have grandkids who are musicians. And we were all just talking and laughing. And it was so different than the rest of the train, which was completely silent. And I just thought, wow, it is true. Like actually, all of us humans, we have so much more in common with each other than we realize. And it's fun to like find connections and talk about, where are you going on the train, and learning from each other. I grew up in Ohio that's like so friendly. And my mom would always say that when you are in the grocery store in Ohio, by the time you pay, you already know what everyone around you is having for dinner. Because everyone's like, oh, you're getting the lamb. What are you making? You know, oh, cream cheese, the secret ingredient to all things made in the Midwest. But it turns out you're happier. Like, there's this paradox of like volunteering and giving that others, like, it's not in our book, but there are other studies that show like when you volunteer, when you give generously, you're not doing it. You shouldn't be doing it to just like feel better, but there's a consequence that you actually are happier. You feel better, which is kind of a fun thing. There's things to gain from living the best way God intends for us.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Well, and it's not just you that feels better, right? And that's the other cool thing about this. It's like the other person walks away feeling better too. And so one of, I think, the most insightful things about Juliana and Nick's work is that they start to unpack why people don't do it. It's like, if we experience like this joy, like this kind of like elevation after we've had these interactions, why don't we do them more often? And it seems like one of the main mechanisms they can pinpoint is just like a reticence to engage because you think other people don't want to talk to you. You almost feel bad, like you're going to be a burden to somebody else. Like, I'm going to interrupt that email that you're trying to send, or you have 5 minutes of peace and quiet before you get home to like the chaos, and I don't want to disrupt that like kind of peaceful moment for you, or whatever it is. And we underestimate the joy that we can bring to other people's lives too. And so I think that for me, that's been something really helpful to have as like a cognitive reframe, especially because it's not like my natural inclination to just be like chatting with, everybody all of the time, but to say like, there's two ways to this, right? There's a way that like I have the opportunity to be Jesus to this person, but they also have the opportunity to be Jesus to me. Like, I can meet Jesus in them too. And so we both have that ability to like grow in like love for one another, but also just to like feel happier and more connected as a function of that interaction.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. I'm in Oklahoma now, so I'm experiencing the flip side of coming from you're Ohio to Washington. The flip side of coming from Oregon to Oklahoma with the friendliness. It's weird. People waving at each other. I'm like, do I know you? No, I don't. This is strange. But it actually is cool to talk to people. What do you know?
Yeah.
And it's good to love our neighbor. Yes.
It is. It makes me excited because I just moved to Texas, and like I'm noticing this too, like smaller town, like you get on an airplane to go to Waco and everybody's talking on the airplane. And I'm so used to, like head down, do my work or what have you. But one of the other things we highlight in the book is just all about like overload and like overstimulation. And in big cities, people don't tend to engage as much, in part because there just is more stimulation, there is more overwhelm, and there is less stimulation in these smaller towns and smaller neighborhoods. So it creates a condition by which people have more capacity to engage. And I think that's always really helpful to remember that our book is helpful, I think, in unpacking. It's not just like people in small towns are nicer than people in big cities, but actually it's because the small towns are quieter. And if you take a person out of a big city, like you just took me like right out of Seattle and you put me in Waco, Texas, and here I am like having 15-minute conversations with people at the grocery store, on the airplane, and so this is another example of where our circumstances really do drive a lot of the way we behave. And so if you're in a big city and you know that, it's thinking more carefully about how you reduce some of that overstimulation or that overwhelm so that you can still show up in that way with the people that are standing right in front of you.
Well, we've identified a lot of what can go wrong. We just talked about some of the benefits. So kind of leaving it up to whatever you want to pull out wisdom-wise. For listeners that do want to grow in their neighborly love, their pro-social behavior, they're not sure how. What do you recommend? What are the practices? What are the things that can help, translate the loving intentions to actually loving people? What do you recommend?
Okay, we've been asked this before, but I'm going to give a different answer than I normally do, and this is really going to throw Brittany off.
Beautiful.
So, the very last chapter, I think maybe the last or second to last one, we talk about person X situation fit. And that's an idea in psychology that kind of people are unique. And this is totally a biblical thing too, right? Like each human is unique. We have unique gifts. We have unique ways to offer. The body of Christ is made up of a lot of different people. And one thing I would encourage people to do is to think about what makes you unique, what makes you you're like a person who notices this type of thing when someone's feeling left out, or you're an extrovert. So at the end of the book, we tell a story about Brittany's wedding. I happened to officiate at, what a gift. But we knew one of the people who was coming had just broken up with, her relationship had ended. And so Brittany, knowing that I am like really into fun parties and very extroverted, but also she's somebody who's really sensitive to how she can imagine like how people will feel if you were just, had a relationship end and you're going to this celebration of a relationship moving to this next level. Right. And she said, Katie, would you just try to be kind of like the unofficial date or friend of this person that you've never met before? And I was like, I love new friends. I'm from Ohio and this is like my superpower. And so kind of our different unique gifts, our different superpowers kind of can complement each other. And so it ended up, we danced and sang and had fun and ate fish and drank wine. I mean, it was such a fun night. And I imagine that woman who was at this party or this wedding, she, for her, it was a very different experience, but it was than it might have been if Brittany weren't really just trying to be who God made her to be. And I wasn't just trying to be exactly who God made me to be, kind of unapologetically friendly and gregarious. And I mean, I'm too much for some people, but when we can find that, see that in each other, I think we can kind of be more loving to our neighbors and not thinking also that we have to do it all, So that's my thought. Be yourself. Be who God made you to be.
Cool. Yeah.
I love that.
What do you got, Brittany?
Yeah. One thing that we didn't talk about, but is really on my heart right now, just given everything that we're navigating in the United States with immigration policy, is one of the chapters that we wrote on scarcity mindset and how that enhances outgroup bias and dehumanization towards other groups. And so I think that some of the language that's been in my head lately is just to be more mindful of when I'm feeling like resources are scarce, whether that's like financial resources or job resources or even safety resources, and trying to reframe that through a Christian lens of like how much God cares for us, and that he's going to provide. And I guess just kind of translating this to more of like an abundance mindset. Like I think Christians are uniquely positioned to be able to say, I don't need to worry about scarcity and I can give freely, I can give abundantly, and I can share what I've been given because God will continue to be good and God will continue to provide. And so where I see folks like, retreating out of fear of scarcity and that enhancing dehumanization for immigrants and refugees and asylum seekers are groups that I work closely with and care a lot about. And I feel like we have a real opportunity right now to counter that scarcity mindset. But we have, again, like a lack of awareness of how those non-conscious processes of like perceiving scarcity enhanced racial bias. We don't see that happen, right? Psychologists could see it because we can put people in experiments and we can make you feel like something is scarce and then give you a whole bunch of like essentially tests to say like, what is your racial bias? And oh, lo and behold, the minute you feel like something is scarce, there goes your racial bias like skyrocketing, right? So we can see that these mechanisms are happening, but people are so unaware of them. And I would hope that this book is kind of a call to action, and maybe just a call to action here of saying, can we pay attention to that feeling of like fear of there not being enough, and how can we give generously and approach people with an abundance mindset anyways?
Yeah. Well, I do want to take some time for you guys to kind of point us to places on the web or wherever you want to show up. Obviously, you have this book. Point us to whatever else you want to point us to, links, social media, whatever. We'll do the plugs and links, and then we'll get to that last question that's even more narrowly practical, maybe. We just did some practical stuff, but we'll get even more narrowly practical in a second. But yeah, where do you want to send people in the world if they want to learn more about you and if they're obsessed like I am with all this cool content and things?
Yeah. Well, Katie and I both have like individual websites, but the best place for folks to go for the book is a website called lovingbetter.net. And at that particular website, you can download resources that we've created for people. So we have a 40-day challenge calendar, which is great for Lent. And if people want to like pick up a 1 day, 1 challenge kind of approach to this, that's a really easy way to do it. Katie also put together a study guide for this book so that if you want to read the book together in community, like a small group or something like that, there's a set of discussion questions, and all that's free. So you could just download it on the website. We have a shared Instagram. It's called Loving Better 2025. That's the handle for it. And we're not big social media people, so we're doing our best with that.
Sure.
But those are the places you can find us.
Yeah, if they want to find us, they need to hop on a little plane to Waco or on a train where we are chatting up our neighbors.
100%.
Hey, great.
Yeah.
Don't tempt me. I like Waco. Waco is a cool zoo, by the way. I'm a zoo guy, and I felt like they had a good zoo. Seattle's a good zoo too, but
we've already been to the zoo.
Nice.
It is a solid zoo. Cool. Way more snakes than the Seattle Zoo. My kids have noticed, and they are ecstatic about it. So
okay,
yes, they love it.
That's fun. Cool.
Yep.
Well, as promised, I give every guest the same last question, and always am fascinated by the answers. It's not really like a rapid fire question, but just whatever comes to mind here. You leave us with a little something, and here's the question as I leave it for everybody. As we close, leave the audience with just one practical action they can do this week to live out their faith fully for Jesus. What do you got?
I'll go first. It's right at the top of my head. Put your cell phone in a drawer the minute you walk into your house. So one of the things that we talk about is that, just the presence of cell phones, even if you're not on them, is distracting enough that you can't give people your full and undivided attention. And I think our families often suffer the most from this. Like, I'll put my phone away when I'm out to have coffee with a friend who I only see once a week. But if I'm just hanging out with my kids or my partner, my phone is right there and I'm texting people, calling people, distracted, what have you. And it's not enough just to turn it off the ringer. It's not enough just to have it face down. Like, if it's there, your brain is constantly monitoring it. So I would say when you get home from wherever you are, once you're home for the night, put your phone in a drawer for the week.
That's great. I need to do that. I don't have a drawer.
Me too. I just bought a little thing with a drawer for this. I'm going to put a big sign in our house. It's like, put your phones in the drawer. Ooh. And I'm very excited. It's motivated by our book.
Did you do the ringer up so you can hear it? Like, if it rings?
No, off. Like, ringer silent, phone in the drawer.
Man, you're amazing. You inspire me.
I like it.
Okay, here's mine. I feel so convicted by this. Letting go of contempt. So what that means is when you have the idea, or when you think to yourself, or you find yourself saying this out loud, and unfortunately, I think we say it to children a lot, when we say, you deserved that. Like, you deserved what was coming to you. Something bad happens to somebody and you're like, ooh, good, they're getting what they deserved. It's almost like a karma type thing. Or, ooh, good, like, I hate that guy, you deserved it. That idea, it's like the complete opposite of loving our neighbor. I found myself even just this past week praying that God would soften my heart towards somebody that I'm like, I want every bad thing to happen to you. Actually, so I taught a Sunday school lesson, the 4th graders, this Sunday on loving your neighbor. And I had them actually do an activity in our book. And I said, draw your classroom where you sit, who you sit near, or you can draw your street and write the names of who's there. And then think about, like, how could you love these specific people? Or, like, do you know them even? Just start by noticing who's your neighbor. And so my son, who's in the 4th grade class, said, Mom, are you going to write down that woman you hate? And I'm like, no. And I thought, and like, I don't know what's hard about writing this book. It was it continues to be so convicting, where I'm like, I am like the queen hypocrite of this book. There's so many passages in the Bible about, like, remove my heart of stone, right? But I think if we could, when we just start to notice, when you think, you deserved that, like, how do we remove that and instead replace it with a more generous read of somebody's situation? Like, maybe they had a rough day, or maybe they're making a decision based on information. You don't have all the you don't know the whole story. I think that would be a Christian practice that if we could all start to do, we would notice in huge ways in our marriages, in our workplace, in our parenting. Because when you feel like somebody's like out to get you or wants the worst from you, it actually brings out the worst in you. It doesn't help anyone else when we think thoughts or use language related to contempt.
It's good.
Brilliant, brilliant. Well, that's it for today. Sadly, of course, recommend people get the book. And I like the study guide idea too. I do think this would be a good small group resource. So throw that out there. I always want to remind people of a kind of a person that you could share this episode with. Somebody probably comes to mind that could benefit from some of this analysis of why we don't love our neighbor and how to do that. And it might be, your partner, your spouse, or someone in your family where you can talk about, hey, maybe we need to put the phones away or whatever, or some other small group leader. But I always recommend people share out these episodes, get the word out, because we have great conversations, great content here that other people, fun fact, can learn from too. So Katie and Brittany, I want to again thank you guys so much. It was great to have you on Christianity Without Compromise. This show is only as good as its brilliant guests, such as yourself. So thanks for being on.
Thank you, Jake.
Thanks for having us.
This episode of Christianity Without Compromise was hosted by me, Jake Doberenz, and produced by Theophany Media, my podcast production company. If this conversation served you, please rate and review the show and share it with a friend and help others find it. You can also subscribe at jakedoberenz.substack.com to get email updates with new episodes every Tuesday and my often humorous theological reflections on Fridays. And as always, don't just listen, live it. Live out that Christianity without compromise. Thanks for listening.